This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. This week, our guest is Lupe Monroy.
Lupe is the founder of Gozo Spaces, a landscape architecture office based in Oakland, California.
Yes, and with Lupe, we talk about her story, her journey to becoming a landscape architect, her family also, and her 5 siblings. And then, interestingly, she actually started off, her first interest was in architecture, as you'll hear. Then she went away and transitioned to landscape architecture.
She went to the green side.
The green side. And she has her own practice, obviously. So we talk about her practice. We also learn about design build landscape architecture companies and her knowledge in that and the pros and cons of those companies for the industry and for clients, how she works with clients, and her favorite building, of course, and some of her favorite landscape architects, in fact, at the end. But it was a very interesting conversation, I think, to get some insights to the landscape architecture profession, and again, how her process is and how she works with clients and approaches design and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and she's pretty awesome, so make sure you check out her work and her website, and I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy this interview.
Yep. Sponsors. Say goodbye to design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project. From mood boards to advanced specification tools to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Share your work in the format that works for you, be it PDF spec sheets or online branded client dashboards with always up-to-date specification details. Join Interior Design Movers and Shakers and start for free by clicking the Programma link in our show notes. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for interior design workflows. The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire. Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking their link in our show notes. This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Lupe. Here we go.
So I was born in King City, California, off the 101. But lived in Greenfield, California most of my life. My first year, my dad works in farming, so he was a mechanic. So we lived in a little trailer off the 101 by the farm for 1 year. And then a year after that, they bought a home in Greenfield, California. So I had the entire house for myself for about 9 months until my sister came along.
Okay. Where is Greenfield?
So Greenfield, since you guys went to Cal Poly, you know where King City's at, right? That's the speeding ticket area where everybody gets a speeding. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So you
I can't remember this.
Coming this way.
It's just north or south of SLO?
It is north.
North. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Speeding ticket central. Right. Okay. Gotcha. So it's near King City.
Yeah. I did go to King City High for a year, and then we got our own high school in Greenfield. So I was the first class to graduate from Greenfield High as well.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing Greenfield is kind of a small population city?
Super small, a lot of agriculture around the area, but that's a starting point for most people, which means that you don't really stay there.
Gotcha. And then obviously you're a landscape architect now. So was there anything about growing up or maybe your dad's occupation that when you were a kid made you think that you would do something with the landscape?
So being Mexican of a migrant family, you are either, and you guys probably have heard of this, a doctor, engineer, or architect, or a lawyer. I've already argued a lot growing up because I grew up with 5 siblings, so that was not going to be it. I don't like blood, so I wasn't going to be a doctor. Engineering to me sounded like too much math, so then I left architecture. But also growing up in a really small home with so many of us, I was very knowledgeable of space and how that felt. So looking back at that makes sense. My dad was also a lot into building stuff and figuring how to make things work. Vegetable beds, and like I said, in the farm industry. So it all kind of had a little seed into how I ended up there.
Did you say 4 siblings?
5. So I have
5 siblings.
Yeah. I'm the oldest. So I was trained for years on how to be a manager. And then I have
That's well said.
Yeah, and I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers. So it's girl, girl, boy, girl, girl, boy.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
I think you might be the only. I don't know anyone else. I don't think any of our other folks that we know have 5 siblings. That's a
lot. Yeah.
That's a big family under one roof. So did they all end up doing
medical things and engineering?
My dad really wanted us all to study the same thing, but it didn't happen. But now that I'm older, it's like we could have run the world if we would.
She had a plan.
Yeah. So my sister went to UC Santa Barbara and then UCLA. So she's a social worker. And then my brother went to UC Davis. And then my other sister went to UC Berkeley and then Davis. She's a doctor. And then my other sister, she went to UC Santa Cruz. And then my younger brother went to community college for a little bit.
Dang.
Wow.
That's pretty good across the board.
Yeah, I'm a great manager.
So did you say then that your first inclination was architecture and not necessarily landscape architecture?
Yeah, I don't think I knew what landscape architecture was exactly. Yeah. So I did apply to Cal Poly as one of my main schools, and that's where I got in under architecture, actually. And then I applied to UCLA under theater, got accepted there as well. But I decided to go to Cal Poly because the only thing I can imagine with theater would be novelas, and I did not want to take that path.
Like novellas as in like soap operas?
Yeah, Mexican soap operas, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that could be cool. I mean, like...
Wait. So I'm curious. So theater and architecture, those are incredibly almost polar opposite things. Did you do theater in high school?
Yeah, and I loved it. It was great. In high school, I did theater, I did sports, I did all the clubs, I did AP classes. I just really enjoyed getting to know people and having different perspectives. And it was a different outlet of creating stories and just escaping. And it was just great.
So, but when you were in the theater classes, you were like on stage. You weren't like writing. You were on the on-stage side of things.
Yeah, so I did a couple of plays, not too many. King City High School, they had a better theater program. I was only there 1 year, so that was the most fun. And then Greenfield High also had theater, but it wasn't the same. I did dabble when I went to New York. I was in high school and I did a summer program in Skidmore College, and I took a couple of classes in New York when I was in high school, and that was fun as well.
Oh, you could have been an actress.
What the heck?
It's not too late.
It's not too late.
You could be a landscape architect who became an actress.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
So then what happened? You got into Cal Poly. Did you start the architecture program and then eventually made the switch to landscape architecture?
So when I went to Cal Poly, I did a program called Summer Institute. So you go right before school starts, the summer before school starts, and you go through your entire program, the flow chart. You meet with advisors. I met with an advisor and she kind of got to know me better and said, hey, I think you might like landscape architecture more. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. And I really trusted her. She's like, let's do it for a quarter or a year and do the classes that can overlap and a couple of the main courses and let me know how you feel. So we did that, and luckily, thankful to her, I was put in the right path. I didn't know that I wanted what I have. So
that's interesting because cool. Most of my interactions with coordinators and folks like that at schools at whatever level, they're not the greatest. That's pretty insightful. Who was the coordinator? Do you remember?
So the Summer Institute was Maria Risu. I still see her. My parents know her. And then the program that helped me, it was Patricia Stewart. So, I mean, the fact that I remember their names, it just shows how much of an impact they had on my life.
Do you know, well, this would be a question for them, but do you know what it was about yourself at that time that made you lean toward landscape architecture?
Did you show up covered in dirt?
Yeah, what was
and
it?
they're like, whoa, I think you belong.
I'm kind of curious, like, if you could examine yourself sort of in retrospect, like what would make someone go one way versus the other?
I'm not quite sure. That's a good question. I think if I see them again, I would ask them. But it was a great program. You know, you go through all your classes, you live in the architecture buildings. That was awesome. So and then you have to remember, this was before Google Maps and Google Search. So I basically, this summer, I spent the whole time getting to know where the classes were, where the food was. It was just a nice experience to get familiar with the campus and the programs and to make sure that I was taking the correct courses.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that. What was it called? Something Institute?
Summer Institute, SI.
Yeah, that's would have been super helpful.
That sounds like a great idea.
For most college students. Because when you show up to college the first day, it's very confusing because it's a big...
What's great about SI also, you connect with the next group of SI students, the next group of SI. So you start creating this community and network.
What? How come I didn't know about this? Okay, so for the first quarter, you said you were doing classes that overlapped, that were both architecture and landscape architecture, and the ones that overlapped.
Yeah, so I think it was like mostly the general ed, but I really liked all the studio classes, so I just felt right and I stayed.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
I'm curious, what kind of classes do you have in landscape architecture training? Like, do you have like history classes? Do you have like math? Do you have drawings? Like, what's kind of like the mix?
So I do believe it was history class. And I remember I had history class my first year because there was a guy who had my name. So my full name is Guadalupe. Guadalupe can be both for female and man. This guy did not show up to any of his classes. So I somehow got his grade and he got my grade. So
how does that work?
Yeah, so we corrected it right away. But I do remember taking theater class my first year.
But your first year at Cal Poly?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So after that first quarter, you realized that landscape architecture was more your direction, and it only took one quarter?
Oh, no, the whole year. I did the whole year. It just felt right, yeah.
Gotcha. And so what about, I guess this would be a question that would be interesting to folks who are considering architecture or landscape architecture, and maybe they don't know the differences between the two, or they don't know, at least in terms of education, which one would be a better fit for them. So what were the things about the landscape architecture side, the courses that were more appealing to you rather than going into architecture?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I really didn't even know landscape architecture was a thing until I went to Cal Poly. And it just made more sense with just my experience in life, and that had more of a connection and calling to me.
Mm-hmm. Was it because it had to do with the landscape? I mean, with growing things and or that aspect instead of, I don't know, material stuff?
I think the first year you do a lot of space development and just understanding the space, and I connected with it more. And I also just being outdoors with my dad, that spoke to me a little bit more. Also, that was a space where him and I really bonded. So,
yeah.
I was wondering, there is a myth that architects have to be really good at math. And I feel like the equivalent myth of that for landscape architect would be like, landscape architect have to love plants. Is that but I mean, is that true? Like, do you have to love plants to be a landscape architect, or is that an option?
You can hate plants and be a landscape architect.
I mean, you don't have to hate them, but like,
well, that question might get me in trouble. So as far as math, I've always loved geometry, and that makes so much sense for design. It's just a relationship of shapes and spaces. So that makes sense. As far as landscape architecture and loving plants, I hated plants. There's just so many. I used to think of plants like, okay, a plant is basically like a girlfriend. If you don't like it in your design, you just replace it. The hardscape is you get married to it. Like, that's very important. But I've learned to love plants. There was just so many of them. But now it's a lot easier just to figure out what plants go best here and there. And to be honest, if you're outside, you need that balance of hardscape and softscape. There is no landscape architecture without softscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in school, what is the education like to become a landscape architect? Like, what are the courses you take? Obviously, we know the architecture side of it, And I also went to Cal Poly, but that's not how we met. And actually during my time at school, we had very little interaction with the landscape architecture school, the students or the teachers or anything. So I know very little about it.
Yeah.
Despite I think your guys' class is being held like across the Dexter lawn from us. Or not even, I think you were in the building adjacent. But anyway, so what are the classes that you take as a landscape architecture student?
So you do all the design, the history. We do a lot of site surveying. So the site surveying is shooting grades, just analyzing, creating base plans. We also do a lot of irrigation, a lot of plant knowledge, a lot of soil science. Those are, I think, most of it. A lot of plant classes, plant ID classes. It's too many. I think that's where I started.
Like they quiz you on plants, like which plant is that?
It would be 20 plants a week.
Oh, that's a lot.
And then sometimes the professor would put the same plant, but this different part of the leaf or whatnot, just to try to trick us.
Oh, that's not cool. And you had to learn like the Latin name?
Oh, hi, the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, see, that's the side of it I don't know if I would be good at it. That sounds something similar to, very similar to like biology classes, but for plants.
Yeah, it was a lot.
So how long was the program? 4 years?
5.
5 years. Oh,
5.
okay.
Yeah, it's a 5-year program. It took me a little bit longer. I had some family stuff, but it's a 5-year program.
Nice. Also, I don't know about this regarding landscape architecture degrees. Is there a difference between professional accredited degrees versus non-accredited?
So I'm not sure. So Cal Poly is accredited. I had to practice under a landscape architect for 3 years to then qualify for the licensing process. Yeah.
3 years after, I guess 3 years at any point, but 3 years probably after you graduate.
After graduation. Now you can start the process right after certain tests. Yeah.
And then this is like super nerding out, but I'm just curious. So 3 years of practicing and then you take an exam, a couple of exams?
5.
5 exams.
Oh, okay. Wow. So you guys get a lot too. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you pay an annual fee, the application to go through it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's the same thing as architects. Yeah. That's more intense than I would have thought. So, I think one of the misconceptions that folks have about landscape architects, or the preconceptions, is that you just kind of select plants. That's like your job as like plant specification. You choose things that look good and you make it kind of pretty, and that's kind of it. Well, I guess the first question would be whether or not that preconception is true. And if it's not true, what else do landscape architects do that's beyond choosing nice looking plants?
So I work in high-end residential, so that means that I work with people's homes, and this is a very sacred space. So I get to know clients, what works in their home or what doesn't. So it's the relationship with space, how they want to move, their function. And then planting is a layer of it, but it's just a small part of it.
I mean, I think there are parallels between what you described and certainly what architects do, and also how our profession is perceived sometimes. I mean, our profession is perceived in a lot of different ways depending on who you speak with, but there's sort of, I think in both, there's sort of like a whole base or section to the work you do that kind of comes, at least for us, would come first before you start specifying. In our case, let's say materials, like building materials, like selecting the specific marble. Like that comes pretty far into the process. And maybe in the very beginning or early on, because we also do houses, if the client has a strong inclination toward a certain type of texture or pattern, then we'll keep that in mind. But the actual action of specifying it doesn't happen until really far into the process. And I think a lot of folks kind of, they don't think about all the things I'm describing vaguely, and they jump to the very end and think, okay, so you select materials. It's like, we do that, yes, but there's like months of work that happens before then. And a lot of it's, to your point, like understanding them, understanding how they move, understanding how they live, and designing firstly a plan, and then we get into specifics later on.
Yeah, so maybe I should go into the process, and that might help. So usually I start with a discovery call. So I'll talk to the client, and this might be via Zoom, phone call, FaceTime. And at that time, I'll have their address, any base plans that they might have, or if they don't have any, that's okay. So then
Wait,
we'll
what is a
go.
base plan?
So a base plan is a site surveying, a plan that shows if they've had architecture drawings before, then they would send that to me. So anything
Oh,
that
gotcha.
just shows the property line, the house, any plans, utilities. So it's a plan that's a base. Yeah.
Oh, base plan. I said base plant. I'm
Oh,
like, I don't know
sorry,
what a base
plan.
plant
Yeah.
is. Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Base plan, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go over their property and then go over what we call the program, what are their goals, how they want to move in the space, their priorities, their non-negotiables, and just kind of walk through it. At that time, I'll also explain to them the design process. So some people, this is their first time they've gone through this. So you kind of have to explain how it works so we can set expectations and have realistic goals. At that time, I also believe that we're kind of on a first date. They're getting to know me, I'm getting to know them. If it feels good at that time after that conversation, then we'll schedule a site visit. At this time, I'll walk through it with the client to make sure that I'm seeing all the opportunities, maybe some red flags, some stuff that might make something a little bit harder, and then just do a very deep walkthrough of the site. And then after that, we start the design process.
Interesting. So are there certain, when you're having that initial phone call, actually, my first question was whether or not after the phone call you've ever declined a client and said, oh, this conversation was weird. I don't think I'm going to work with you.
So I mean, what has happened in the past, sometimes if people have no idea what a design costs, if they don't know, then it's like, okay, I obviously didn't know what I was getting myself into. Then I would sometimes just make recommendations because I do want our interactions to be positive, regardless if they work with me or not. And I might say, hey, just go to this place. They have materials, or do this, or whatever might work within their budget. If we're not a match, then that's okay.
Gotcha.
I think that's a good mindset to have, because there is a lot we see that in our side too. Like sometimes projects are way, way too small, or the budget is just non-existent, and it kind of sucks to turn someone away because of that, because oftentimes they just don't have other option.
Yeah.
So if you could at least let them onto the right path, so they could get closer to what they need, I think that's as professional as you can be.
Yeah, and there's times where okay, now I know I'm not ready right now, but I'm definitely gonna come back to you when I'm ready. So it works out. It always does.
Gotcha. It's an interesting thing. Talking about project budget real quick is that there is on the architecture side, there's definitely a threshold. I think designers and architects and creatives will love to say that you can create great design regardless of the budget. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's true. You can create a great design regardless of the budget, but whether or not you can build it with the budget is a different thing.
I always tell people we can be creative, but we cannot turn dirt into gold.
We can't.
We're not magicians. Yeah.
Or dirt into plants that don't exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then we try to figure out a solution. Okay, like, are you open to phasing it? If we phase it, then we make sure that phase 1 works seamlessly with phase 2, and you still have a space you can use. And I've had projects like that where we built a phase 1 and they love it, they use it, and once they're ready when they have the budget to build phase 2, then we do, but they're able to use the space the whole time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does phasing oftentimes look like you do all of the landscape, let's say master plan for lack of a better term, and you put in some of the plants and then you put in more plants later on? Or is it more like spatial division?
So sometimes an example would be they might just do the front first and then the back. But what people sometimes don't think, that line, that border between the front and the back, we got to make sure it connects once you're done, ready for phase 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I've had a project where they really wanted a jacuzzi, but they had to wait a little bit more. So on phase 1, the jacuzzi was not there, but we still had it framed out and it just felt like a patio. So then when phase 2 came, the plumbing was ready for it, and they didn't have to excavate or do any extra work.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Gotcha.
That's really smart.
The phasing is making me laugh because we've done projects that are doing projects that are phased. And sometimes it's relatively easy because it's like a discrete and separate space. It's like one level versus the first level. And the stair, we just decide it's this phase or that phase. But other times it gets very tricky, and it's hard. It's kind of hard to keep track of. There's a lot to keep track of sometimes with how things merge between the phases and then planning for the next phase. And the most difficult thing sometimes is you have to do enough in phase one to prep for phase two, exactly like you said with the concrete pad. But sometimes phase two is not fully thought out because no one wants to spend all of the design fee on the entire phases when they don't have to yet. Yeah. So there's always sometimes a little bit of kind of like future thinking of, well, there's a very good chance, like 90% chance phase two was going to look like this in this area. So that's what we're going to plan for.
Yeah, so I always advise the client, let's do at least the concept for the entire property and not detail everything out in phase one, but just to make sure that we have the big picture. Yep.
That's the same thing we do as well. Usually it's like a master plan for the site, and then there's some conceptual understanding of the other architecture, and then the landscape as well, but we're not getting into the nuts and bolts of stuff.
Yeah.
So if I'm a client and I call you and I say, I have this project, I have this property. During the first phone call, what would be some of the things that we would talk about? Assuming, let's say, I know nothing about your industry, and I'm like, well, I'm one of the people who I'm like, okay, so you're a landscape architect, so you're going to choose some plans for me. So what do we need to do? What do you need to know for me to actually get into it?
So I get all the drawings that you have. We have this video call. We look at your house and I ask, what is it that you love about your house that you want to bring outdoors? What is it that maybe you feel like you can do in your outdoor space that you're not right now? What is it that stresses you about your space right now?
Stress is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
And then we go over their goals, what they're trying to achieve. Do they want a space where they entertain? Do they want a space just for quiet moments, or maybe both? And if it's a space that changes according to different events, then we have features that we can change, and maybe it's furniture, not something super permanent. And we do talk about budget, just so I know. I feel like I'm like a parent. I need to know the number because I don't want to overpromise something that you can't afford.
Yeah.
And I'll give them a ballpark because I do have experience in design build. I have a pretty good sense of how much something overall costs.
Do these costs vary depending on location? For us, building homes and interiors, NorCal might be different than SoCal, might be different than another state. Is it the same?
California might be different than another state in general. I would say California is expensive.
Or one city over the other, the cost could jump up and down, or is it more of a constant thing?
Yeah, it's more of a constant thing, and if it's available during the pandemic, it was crazy. I saw stuff going triple the price just because it was in high demand or it was not as easy to get. Yeah.
So so we should continue the conversation about process and budget and all those things, but you had said you had experience in design build, and that reminded me that I completely sidetracked the story. So after you finished Cal Poly, going backward in time, did you work for a landscape architect, or what happened afterwards?
I worked a week after graduating.
Well, you started work a week after, or you worked for only a week?
No, the week after graduating.
Oh, okay.
It was really fast. I got a job before graduating, and they were ready to roll. A lot of my friends were taking the year off, and this was 2008. I couldn't afford to take the year off. The only place I can go was my parents' backyard, and I've already explored that space. It's not that exciting.
You're like,
where are you going this summer? I'm backpacking through Europe. I'm going to backpack in my parents' backyard.
Yeah. So I was like, no, I need to work. So I worked for a company by Menlo Park, which is an awesome space or area to start working in residential. And it was a design build from. I was there for 7 years. So 2008, the economy was still okay, but 2009, that's when we had that crash.
What made Menlo Park a great place to work?
It's just so diverse. You get huge houses, small houses. The small houses, they just want this exciting program. There's a lot of engineers there, little space with these houses look so tiny. And then you get to the backyard and it's like, wow, this amazing view.
2008 graduation. You also made me laugh because it does seem like to be a fairly common, I don't know if it's an American thing, but for college graduates to just go and backpack and travel for either a summer or for a year. And I was in a similar situation than you. I didn't work a week after I graduated, but there was definitely no opportunity to just vacation for 6 months somewhere. Like,
I also
where does that money come from? I don't have the money to do that.
And I also don't think that's a great idea.
What?
Like,
I would have done it if I had the money.
well,
It's a great idea.
I don't know. Then it's really hard to even go and start working.
Well,
because,
that's the idea, though, right? So that now that's like the time. You have the time to do it. You don't have kids. You're not tied down to a job. I mean, of course, if you have
but then you're behind. Then you apply a year later for a position, and they're all taken, and they're looking at your resume. What have you done? Well, I've been backpacking for a year, and I mean, now.
Yeah, I also grew up with the mindset like college was a goal since elementary school, and then it was just I've always had this thing. Okay, what's next? What's next? What's next?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think if I had that same feeling. I mean, it was like when I was a kid, I don't think like college was always sort of inevitable. Yeah. Not assuming that I would get into places, but I mean, it was never not part of the picture. And I don't know. I just always assumed after I graduated college, I'd start working because how else do you feed yourself?
Yeah. So my dad didn't get to go to too much school because he had to work at a young age. I think he went to school up to like maybe 7th grade. So it was really important for my family that we took advantage of our education and made whatever we could with that. He always wanted us to have choices. And in order to have choices, we felt that we had to go to school and wanted to go to school and take advantage of that.
I'm going to guess you were one of the students at Cal Poly and in college. You were like on time. You did your homework
prepared.
On time. You were organized and prepared.
I had the same seat. I went to office hours. I was valid.
You went to office hours? I don't know anyone who went to office hours.
Wait. What is office hours?
Yeah, go ahead and explain.
So office hours are hours that the professor has open if you want to go in there and ask any questions.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
We don't have that in France. That's cool. No, we don't.
Yeah.
It's like your time is the class time and then goodbye. Good luck.
Yeah. Just to go back a little bit. I mean, my dad, if I got an A minus, he would say, well, next time go for that solid A. Yeah.
An A minus way throughout like high school and lower or through college?
Not college.
Okay.
College is a different game. Game. No, during middle school and high school. Although it did help me because I was valedictorian in middle school. So.
Okay, you're one of these people. Okay, I got it now. Just like talented, smart, organized, all that kind of stuff.
I had to work 5 times as hard. Things did not come easy to me, and that has helped me in life. I used to get really upset about that, but now I know that it's something that's a strength.
What makes you say you had to work 5 times harder?
It's just some stuff like I don't feel like it would come naturally to me. I just would have to study a little bit more than other people. There's people that I would see like not even go to class sometimes and get an A. I'm like, how? What?
Yeah, I know those people.
Yeah. Well, okay. I would fall into the category of someone who works definitely not 5 times harder, maybe like 1.5 or twice times as hard because nothing came naturally. So
yeah,
I remember you're talking about AP classes. Like there were kids in high school and college who just show up. I had like a close friend of mine, you know him. He would show up to physics AP classes and just like ace the exam. I'm like, but you didn't even read any of the material. How do you understand physics without learning physics? Meanwhile, I'm studying like until 2:00 in the morning. I get like a B. Like, this is great.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe not 5 times, but definitely twice as hard.
Twice as hard. But you were valedictorian and you got A's. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Also sidetracked. So what were we talking about? We were talking about slow
working after graduation. Yeah.
Oh, so the other thing is that when you transitioned and when you graduated and then worked at that landscape architecture office studio, was there anything about working in the professional setting that surprised you that was very different from school?
So the first week, they sent me to planning and building.
Oh,
The first week. Oh, no.
Welcome to the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, if any of my jobs had a reality show, it would have been this company. It was just the first week, go to planning and building. And I'm like, what? There's these many rules, but people bought their home. Why are there so many restrictions?
I mean, it is a good question. It's like, if you buy the property and you own it, why do we have to comply to all this stuff?
I know.
Yeah. So
But that's something you don't learn in school. I mean,
No.
architecture, like you kind of know there is maybe some rules we have to follow, but you're not made aware that it's going to be like half of your battle in your career is going to be that.
To that extent. And then you find out that there are rules, but then there's also, how do you interpret these rules? What do these rules mean to certain people?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good point, because I think that's something that certainly students, but also non-professionals, so let's say clients, might not know, is that there are these codes for the building and planning and everything else, but there a lot of times a lot of gray areas. They're like the basic ones that are like very obvious and clear, like this is the setback, that's the number, but kind of a lot of it is just gray, weird territory. And it actually, at least in our case for architecture, it does highlight and emphasize the point that every building is different, and that's how you know that the codes that every building is different, because the codes don't equally apply to everything. There's always these gaps, even on simple, quote, simple projects. We would have questions, and you look at the code, and it doesn't really explain exactly what we're dealing with in every project we do. It's just the nature of it.
Yeah, so I quickly learned that once I found somebody in a department that I liked, I would keep them in, okay, this is my list, this is my person. And then there was people that just confused me, so they were on my blacklist. I'm like, okay, I'm not talking to that person. He just makes things too difficult, and I leave even more confused.
Yeah. Some of those people were like super not helpful.
Yeah.
Like, so you're there at that practice for 7 years, and were you doing mostly single family residential work or different types of things?
Yeah, so we did single family residential there. So I started as a junior designer, then a designer, then the design director. We were design built. So I also worked with the construction part of it. So I had to go to the meetings for construction to make sure that the design department was prepared for their schedule. So I was kind of the bridge of design and construction. And then towards the tail's end, I was also starting to be project manager, and that was being out there in the field as well, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, cool.
Is it a common thing for landscape architecture to be design build offices, or not so much?
I don't think so. I feel like I'm really lucky that I got that. I know sometimes designers that don't really have an understanding of construction and how things get built. But I do think that it's happening now that a lot of designers are experiencing both the design and build, which is great.
So let's talk about design and build more. So how does that work for landscape architecture? And this might also quickly extend to the question of how do you, like, okay, let me step back. So what is the scope of a landscape architect? Like, is it just the softscape, the dirt and the plants and things and the greens and things like that? Or does it also bleed into hardscape design?
Or structures, accessory structures,
pergolas, outdoor kitchens, jacuzzis. I mean...
Yes.
Where does it?
Yes, so it's from once you open the door and touch the floor. So it's the hardscape, all the paving, outdoor kitchens, pools, pergolas, sunken trampolines, infinity pools, outdoor showers, swings, hammocks, all of that.
Wow, that's pretty extensive. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing because it's a very diverse set of, how do I call it? Like, you have a very wide palette to work with because you extend it from the softscape to the hardscape and everything in between. And most of the time for architects, we don't deal with softscape stuff like at all. I mean, the most we would do is a conceptual understanding. So like, oh, like we're going to have some green here that intrudes the house into this like glass courtyard thing or whatever. But we don't, that's it. We just deal with hard building things.
Yeah.
But you deal with kind of both sides. And I'm wondering, how does an average landscape architect learn both sides, or is it pretty common for landscape architects to sort of be more proficient on more of the softscape and not the hardscape, or the hardscape and not the softscape? If that makes sense.
For Cal Poly, it was equally. So I do feel like Cal Poly did a really good job at having us understand both aspects of it.
Gotcha. But
it's interesting. It sounds to me like it's architecture, except that it's exposed to the elements.
That's basically what it is.
Yes, without the ceiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it. As long as it's not enclosed, it's out. It's considered landscape.
Limit, which could be a good thing and a bad thing, right?
Yeah. Do you often work with architects on projects? Like, how does that relationship and kind of like delineation of scope of work works?
I have, and I've also, interestingly enough, right now I'm working with a lot of interior designers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then I've worked with contractors that will call me and say, hey, they want more than just a pool. Client doesn't realize that I'm touching the rest of the space, so then I work with them as well.
Yeah. Scope creep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So what was my question before that having to do with the landscape architecture scope? Oh, design build, right? So and it's in the design build office that you were at. So were you guys doing the construction of all the aspects of the landscape architecture that you described?
We did everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm very thankful for that experience because I got exposed to that right away.
And now let's give a shout out to our sponsors who support our show.
We are supported by Enscape, which is a fast and easy to use real-time visualization and VR tool for the AEC industry. Enscape is not a standalone application. Instead, it's a plugin which makes things much easier. It plugs into Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. And with Enscape, you can create realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas, and videos. You can also immerse clients into VR to give them a deeper understanding of their building. Enscape is used by more than 500,000 monthly users worldwide from over 150 countries. So if you want a fast and user-friendly real-time visualization experience, click on the Enscape 3D link in our show notes.
If you're still using separate 2D and 3D computer programs in your office, then stop that. Get with the times and advance to a BIM computer program, and we recommend ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to freely design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. ArchiCAD continually evolves with technological advances, allowing architects to push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. Start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking on the ArchiCAD link in our show notes.
I was wondering, does the season or the climate kind of impacts the timeline and construction of landscape projects?
If we're on a hillside, yes. Especially if with permitting, certain cities will not let us do construction during certain time periods. And if we do, we got to make sure that we take extra precaution with hillsides.
So design build experience, I can see where that would be super helpful. Is in that case, was like the construction side of it a separate company, or was it all underneath one umbrella?
It was the same company.
Wow.
It was crazy. It was awesome. Since I was the bridge, I had to protect the design department also, and then the construction department. The construction department sometimes will be, well, why isn't this done? Or the design department's like, what? We've started construction, but the drawings are not done yet. So it was figuring out how to manage both parts of it as a big machine that actually functions. People think that design built just works well. No, but you have to make sure it does. There's some steps that have to be taken.
Yeah, it's a good point because, well, one, I think there are a lot of design build companies where the design and build sides are actually, in fact, separate companies. But your point is interesting because I think we were talking about the other day, there's an inherent difference between construction and building on one side and design and all the other stuff on the other. And there just is. And they're kind of different people. They're kind of different mindsets. And even if they're under the same company, they're still going to be very different people, different processes, different priorities, different everything. And having that person in between is critical. And having the two sides talk to each other is also critical, but sometimes difficult.
I also think that design built is different now than what it used to be. I do feel that the word design built is being thrown out there, and it does not mean what it used to mean. I know there's certain companies that are more of a construction company, but they call it design built because they design within their company, but the design process that they go through is not design. I believe one of your podcasts calls it drafting, and I think that's what it is.
Interesting. So you see that same pattern happening in your industry, because we obviously see that in ours. And I think it's kind of, we were talking about that the other day. I was watching a video of like a guy who was like, showing like how to frame a window and a door and, a contractor, right? And I was like, it's impressive that contractors can build things, accurately and like precisely, make things flush and this and that. Like it takes a certain level of hand skills to build something to a good level. And then it made me think, like the way like his brain is working based on that video is very different from like how my brain is working. And I'm thinking if I was going to do his job, I would probably approach it from my perspective, right? So if he's going to try to do my job, he's going to approach it from his perspective, and therefore it's going to be very different than like, let's say what design is, because design is my field, right? And that just made me think about design build in general, who are run by more construction companies rather than designers, or maybe they just have a person in house who just does drawings. Is that design mindset and way of thinking isn't in their DNA. No, like they have the technical support, but the DNA power is not there.
And I think one of the red flags to listen to is when somebody says, our design is free. Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
It just shows like a lack of respect to design, a lack of pride. I'm not going to give something for free that I'm prideful for. It just doesn't make sense. There is a client for everyone. So I just think that clients need to just make sure that they understand what they're getting.
Yeah, that's a super good point.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. Because there are definitely some people, especially if they're tight on budget and they just don't care about design really and they want it done. That's not for us. I have issues with that perspective, but fine if you have that perspective. And then some of these, quote, design build or build design companies could be a good fit. But your point is a good one, that at the very least the client should know kind of sort of which bucket they would fall into and which path they would go down. Because we have seen many folks who go with a design build. I mean, I like if I had a penny for every time I've heard nickel, I'd have like a couple dollars at this point. And like every time I hear someone who is a client who's like, oh, you're an architect. I wish I knew you like a few years ago because I had this experience with a design build company. And of course, I just met this person, so they don't know me. I don't know them. But I'm like, yeah why did you do that? Like, what are you people doing? Like, don't do that.
So I think it's important for people or clients to ask, what does design build mean? Because it can be many things. The big misconception is that people feel like it's going to be seamless, and it's not always the case. And it's also, design is supposed to be chaotic in the beginning, like that there's nothing seamless about developing a space in the beginning.
You're right. It's messy. It's experimental. You're searching for something. If it comes out of your pocket in 2 seconds, that's not design. It's something that's been cooked already, warmed up again, like frozen and put back out. Like, it's not. It's not fresh served. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the first part of design process is coming up with 3 different designs for the client, so they can be part of the process as well.
Yeah.
Like the first concept might be a space that exactly how they envisioned it, because I have to respect that they've spent time imagining their space, the outdoor space. It might not be the best way to create their space, but I need to respect that, and they need to see that. And then the second concept, it's a little bit crazier, a little bit more designy. And the third one is like, let's go for it. And then usually they'll pick something in the middle. And I've had sometimes where they go with the third one.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting way to approach the three options, or an interesting way to view them and how they perform, because it also allows you to understand the client better after that one meeting, depending on which route they go. If they go the safe route, or if they go with the option that is, let's say, the least interesting, but just it checks the boxes and it's what they wanted, then you kind of know how the rest of the project is going to take place. If they go for option 3 and then beyond, then it's like, okay, I see you.
Yeah.
I get where you're going now, and I get your mindset.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
So I've had a client that was like, I want my fire pit here. I want it. And I was like, I know it doesn't make sense, but I can't tell him that. Like, I need to show him. But he was just like, no, it needs to be here. It needs to be here. I'm like, it breaks up his space. It just doesn't make sense. But he was just like, it has to be there, has to be there. And then once he saw all 3 of the concepts laid out, he's like, I get it. Yeah. I get
it. But that's the thing. Yeah. A lot of times people who have their mindset like that, they have to get a visual so they could really understand and see, why it's not working. Then you can actually point out why it's not working. And unless they start sketching out something else, that's basically it.
And we're creating a relationship, and I need to honor what he thinks, what they think, and just show it to him. And it's just, we have to do it that way.
It's also interesting because it makes me realize that, especially in the early days of the design process and you're speaking with the client, they've oftentimes, as you said, visualized this outcome just in their imagination for a couple of years maybe, or even longer. But it's never actually been drawn.
No.
And I think one, a landscape architect you hire will have a good ability to visualize. Like, you knew probably in the first meeting the fire pit should not go here. You didn't need to draw it.
But he was passionate about it, and I had to respect his passion.
But I also think like a big, like the how do I put it? Like, one of the advantages we have that sort of, this is a weird way to explain it, it makes our jobs easier, is that we can draw it and look at it. Like, when we're working, we draw the 10 options and very clearly, okay, these 8 don't work, kick them out. Mm-hmm. And we have kind of physical evidence in addition to our cognitive abilities of imagination to just do quick tests and see. Clients sometimes have wacky ideas, but which means that they don't know design, yes, but it also means that they haven't seen it. That's the thing. Like, we get, it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but we get to look at it in the computer space or sketching space, and we do quick tests. We don't have to sit around for 2 years and just visualize with imagination. We can actually do the thing.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense too to present like those 3 kind of like gradual options. Like, you built on the previous one, you slowly showing them the possibilities, rather than just blasting them in the face with 3 options that's just gonna like shock them. Like, there's kind of an emotional, sensible attachment to design, and I feel like you can't just rush things to people. You have to kind of like prepare them for the next option to come. So I think it's very smart.
It's really important for me that they feel confident in what they decide.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, your description of those 3 options also makes me think that a person feeling confident in their decisions is very closely tied to how much they trust you as a professional.
Yeah.
Because let's imagine their trust in you is 100% implicit. There's 0 questions. Then anytime you say that this of the 3 of the 2 options, this is the best one, they're not going to hesitate. They're going to say, well, I trust you completely. So that is the best one. I agree. I trust you. And I'm very confident in my decision. I think confidence in clients' decisions dwindle if they have a certain personality type. That's for sure the case. But also if they sense that the professional, if they don't trust the professional, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen it's like they're little kids and their confidence grows so much. They're in their space in the beginning, like little balls and stress. And then as we start designing, I just see their posture and just pride change to just the body language. And it's really awesome to see that.
Yeah, that's true. I like that. So going back to the conversation about design build, though, so you were saying that there are design build companies who offer their design services for free, which is crazy. And my guess would be that what also happens as a result what happens with the profession is that then you get clients who come to you or another landscape architect and say, well, I could hire you as a landscape architect. I like you. I like your work. However, this other person says they're going to do it for free. And so now you're not really competing because it's not the same sandbox that you're in. But in the client's view, you're all in the same group, right? So now clients, what am I saying? Like the metrics, the baseline for what your fee is or how things work is just completely thrown out of whack.
So I tell them why. Like I'm offering this much more. I'm actually offering you a design process. I'm offering you I've spent 5 years of preparing for this. This is what I'm also offering you. You are free to choose whatever matches with you, and I respect that. If you have any further questions in the future, my door is always open. I've had clients that said, okay, I'm going to go with somebody that's a little bit cheaper. And they've come back because they said, I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like they were understanding me. It just didn't feel right. And they're already spending this much money on building a space. As you guys know, we're the cheap part of it.
That's a good point. We are the cheap part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you save on materials. Like pick a stone that's cheaper, but like get the process right and design done right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny your description of the client coming back. I think they're good architects and bad architects. There are good landscape architects and bad ones for sure. But let's assume we're dealing with good professionals. Like I don't know. I think clients maybe sometimes don't understand that even when you're hiring a creative person, a designer, let's call it, which seems to be a very kind of amorphous, vague thing. Like you don't know what you're getting exactly. There's not like construction. It's easy to pay a contractor money because they are going to buy the materials. So I understand why it costs $100,000 because $100,000 is needed to buy the marble. So it's like very clear. But when you go to pay a creative person, it's kind of weird. It's like, well, I don't know exactly what I'm paying you for. Yeah. I know I'm going to get a design, but what exactly is happening? And I lost my train.
I'm just going to get drawings, therefore,
Yeah. So I don't think they understand that when you get what you pay for when you're working with a designer, even if it seems like a confusing, murky process and you don't really know what you're paying for. You do. Yeah. I mean, there are quantifiable differences in terms of even the drawings. I mean, if we're trying to be more specific and concrete about stuff.
Yeah, so it's important for me to explain to them the process so they know what they're getting through. This is like a new world for some of our clients, and my goal is to explain, okay, this is how it's going to go. This is what flows. This is what you're physically going to touch. And this is what this drawing means for you as far as the design process and the construction process.
And you also said that, one of the remarks the returning clients will say is that I didn't feel heard. I didn't I didn't enjoy the process. And I think also that's another big difference between a proper professional landscape architect who that is their job and their profession is that, I mean, obviously you know this, like a lot of your time as a professional goes toward thinking about how to work with people. Sometimes it's like 95% of it. Yeah,
and every client's a little bit different. Every client needs different drawings, different forms of communication. Some clients like email more. Some clients like a phone call. Some clients like a text. Everybody's a little bit different, and figuring out their preference of communication.
Yeah, and I don't think that level of service and that amount of thinking about the relationship exists generally when you have a design build company like the ones we're sort of describing, where it's led by a builder and then again there's like one lonely drafts person in the corner. Yeah. Like that's just not their. And also, by the way,
in the corner without a window, to a tiny desk.
Yeah, and to be honest, like the landscape architect, designer, architect who is good at what they do, they're very likely not going to be working in a place like that anyway.
It's just the losers.
Okay.
And it's important to ask, what do you mean that you have a designer? What does that mean? Like, did they go to school for it? What have they done? And you can also look at their projects. If they all look the same, just a different layout, is that space really custom to the homeowner?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's free, because it's the same same design, just shaped differently.
Yeah,
And I think also like you could tell clients, well, ask them like, what is their design process? You know,
Yeah.
and if they can't explain it, that means there isn't.
it's the McDonald's. It's the
Yeah,
McDonald's of landscape
it's
architecture.
the fast food of design. No, really.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when did you decide to start your own practice?
Woo! I should have done it years ago, and my sisters will tell you this. So I worked the first 7 years with that company. I had gone as far as I could. It was the most craziest life experience ever. There were times where I slept under the desk, but I wouldn't change anything. I learned so much. And then I worked for a smaller company that was also design built. But when I started working for that company, I had started getting clients through contractors that I had said no to because I wanted to respect the first company I worked for. So as part of my negotiation and contract with the second company, I asked them to allow me to freelance.
Mm-hmm.
So after the first 7 years of just working with one company, after that, I was working with another company and also working with my own personal clients. And those
cool.
were really exciting.
So you slowly kind of transition into doing your own thing. Like it wasn't like a harsh, okay, tomorrow I quit my job, I start my thing. You just kind of like eased into it.
No, and I was fighting it. And all these companies that I worked with, I did all the design, but I also helped them with marketing and sales and everything. So I slowly started building this experience on what it took to run a company. I was basically running a company but not being rewarded financially for it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is that why your sisters told you should be doing your own thing?
Yeah. and I think if you ask them, they're probably like, you're kind of miserable. And I couldn't see it because I loved what I did. I loved my clients and I didn't see it. So first 7 years with that company and then 2 years with that smaller company, they let me go and I did not expect that. We were doing, getting big projects, but later I found out that they were not that good with their money. So they had to let go of the highest person and that was me.
Yeah, the most expensive person.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything personal, but it's just business. So then I decided, okay, let me work for commercial. That feels safer. I took like a 30K salary cut to work compared to what I was making just because I wanted to feel safer. And I lost my soul in a commercial company. And it was a huge company. It was beautiful. They had lunch and learns with pizza, not my thing, but still. But I did get to learn a lot about AutoCAD shortcuts.
The most valuable.
That's a clip. The headline will be the 3 reasons to work for a big commercial company. Reason 1, 2, and number 3, AutoCAD shortcuts.
So yeah, I worked 1 year with that huge commercial company. I won't name them.
Sure.
But nobody was happy and everything. I didn't really get to design. It was just like, okay, we need plans now. The architect drawings are done. Electrical's done now. Now we just need plans. And it was just so soulless. Once I created spaces for people that I got to know, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And they were so crazy about their shortcuts. Everybody had to do the same shortcuts. They had a cheat sheet for their shortcuts.
Wow.
If they caught you not using their shortcuts, they're like, oh, you're not being as productive as you can be. See, we've tested this. We've tested the shortcuts. And then
it's kind of mental.
Tell them it's an attempt to my freedom. Like, I think you should be able to find and decide on your own shortcuts. What the heck?
Yeah. So that
was too much.
Was only 1 year.
Oh, it's not too bad. I mean, it could have been worse. So you could have been sucked into that for 5, 6, 7 years.
And I really tried, but it didn't work out. And then I worked for a company here in Oakland for almost 4 years, and I worked with her as a contractor. So that set me up to start setting myself up to have my own business. So what that meant for me was setting up my 401k, setting up my health insurance, all this non-sexy stuff that adults do,
Yep.
So I did that, and then I was still handling my own clients, and then that started getting a little bit heavier. Um, but after the second year, third year, I'm like, okay, I think I can do this, and I want to do this. And I checked in with my team, which is my brothers and sisters, and they're like, yeah, we've been telling you for years that you should have your own business. And so I was financially planning for that. And then the pandemic hit. And that
Awesome.
actually expedited stuff because it just made everything faster. And it made me really sit with myself and ask myself these hard questions, like, am I happy with where I am? Am I really doing what I love to the highest potential? And the answer was no. And then my mama was diagnosed with cancer. So I was like, shit. I guess I'm going to have to put this on hold. And it did the opposite.
It pushed you to like move faster on doing it?
Yeah. So she was going through chemo. And the first 2 days after chemo, I call it her crazy days, because she would talk about, you know what? I lived a happy life. If I leave today, it's okay. And that to me was crazy. I couldn't imagine my life without her. And then she also talked about her life regrets. And that hit me really hard.
You're like, those AutoCAD shortcuts, man. That's it.
Yeah, so it's like, you know what? I don't want to regret not giving it all. I love my clients. I love my projects. They deserve all of me. So then I decided to 100% commit myself to my company.
And so those conversations with your mom really stand out in your mind as one of the moments where a moment of clarity came, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think was stopping you before this conversation from doing it? Was it like just like financial instability that was a little bit scary? Was it like lack of or like self-confidence in you being able to like do it by yourself? Like what do you think it was?
I think it was stability, and it's also not something that was the plan. I grew up having a plan for everything, and this was not the plan. But it checked off I had a list of like, okay, I'm trying to, like you tell a client, what is it that you want to get out of the space? What I wanted to get out of life. In order to achieve that, I had to do it as a business owner. But
Gotcha.
it was just not the way that I had envisioned it being for me. But I looked back and I'm like, I've been training to be a manager since I was a little girl. I took care of 5 kids. I've been working with these bigger companies where somehow they trust me with their money and with their marketing and their sales. So if they trust me, I must be qualified.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good point. And you do a very good job actually on all fronts, which is not super common for small businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's 100 things you have to do as a small business, and it's really hard to do even 6 of them really, really well because there's just not enough time in the day. That's really the constraint is time. But yeah, you're kind of firing on all cylinders, across the board. So now that we hear your story more in depth, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And I think one of the hard things for me was like, I love working with teams. I love being a part of a team. So it was really hard for me, like, how do I become a business owner and build a team? And I think I've created that team through connecting with other professionals like you guys. Like, you guys are my team. I communicate and collaborate and spit ideas out with other landscape architects. So like my team just looks different now.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah. That's a good take. I agree with that. I don't think I've ever heard that said exactly that way, but I've thought about that. It's a good point. I think one of the biggest differences
it's your people, it's your community. Your team is your community.
Like when you're in an office, and let's say the office is at least 5, 6, 7, 10 people or larger, right? There's a body of folks that you're around, and that's your team, and that kind of fills up the team and community requirements like that fills that part up. But then when you start your own practice, and let's say you're on your own, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And everyone else. Yeah, I like your point. The team expands to.
But you get to choose your team.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
like
you get to choose your team. That's the other thing too,
yeah,
which is nice.
I get to bench who I want to bench.
Yeah.
So I have these great connections with these different material places, and they're my team. I have great connections with different contractors, and I go out there and I meet the team. I know what team is out there. I know their names. I speak their language. I know you guys know that construction is led by Latinos, Mexicans. So that is my team. It comes in a different shape.
Do you think, touching on that quickly, do you think that's like a kind of a super skill to have, that you can actually speak to, the guys who are doing the installation in their native language rather than just use the intermediate person to get to the information?
1,000%. I was talking to my sister who's a doctor, and she was talking or sharing with me how much respect she has for her nurses, because the nurses are her eyes when she's not there. She's not there 100% of the time. She can't. So she depends on the nurses, and they see stuff that she doesn't see. So when I have these construction crew guys, they're there, they're on site every day, every minute. If I create a relationship with them, the project moves so much smoother, so much better, and they see stuff that maybe I don't see. So
yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, for us, it really depends on the contractor we're working with, but the first relationship we have to take care of is with the site super, who oftentimes speaks English. So that works for us.
They don't speak French much. So.
But that's true. There aren't many French contractors at all in the United States. I've never come across one.
No, yeah, there is one out there.
But with the subs or the installers or the fabricators, sometimes they don't speak English, and then it becomes difficult. But the donuts, that's how donuts is a universal language. I bring donuts. Everyone likes donuts.
I do burritos. I try to keep my
fancy.
You one-upped us. That's a good call.
I give my guys lattes without sugar and steak burritos. So
wow, you're spoiling them. Okay.
I love the guys. Every time they're like, "Oh, hablas español?" They say, "Eres una de nosotras. You're one of us." I'm like, yeah.
See, I'm afraid if I brought a burrito to a Hispanic worker, they'd be like,
it's a bit offensive.
Racist. What are you doing?
Just bring Chinese food.
At one time, so with SketchUp, I created this 3D model where I can see it through my cell phone. And I had the whole crew look at the 3D model and walk on site. It was like the best feeling ever. They had this big oh, this is what you need. Oh, I get it.
That's cool.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
We this is a different conversation, but we've been experimenting, looking into the thing you just mentioned.
AI, yeah.
But for some reason the other day it was being weird. Like all the walls were kind of blue instead of white. I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, they glitch a little bit here and there. So and everything's moving and changing so fast. So I expect that we're gonna have a little bit more glitches.
Yeah, Apple Vision. Just give her an Apple Vision.
Yeah, a lot of people are gonna get into the hospital because of Apple Vision. Crossing streets without looking, typing emails when whatever. That's
So talking about the professional side and the process again, so you had mentioned something which I thought was interesting. What was it? Having to do with budget. That because of your design build background, you're not afraid, you have the knowledge, you're not afraid to talk about budget in the very first conversation, it sounds like, or very early on. And I can see where that would be a huge advantage for clients, because most clients, as you said, are new to the process. And of course, first question, any client of any service, any product would be, how much is it and how long it's going to take? And oftentimes I find that design professionals are hesitant to talk about numbers for a myriad of reasons. But one of them being is because they just don't know, or they're afraid that they're going to make a mistake and give a number that's not accurate.
Yeah, so I love ranges. So
yeah.
So I always say, hey, this is the range. And it's just a temperature check to make sure that it's not way off of what they want to spend. And once they give me a number, then I'm like, okay, this is what we can do within that number. Because again, the goal is to have some kind of solution and have our interaction be positive.
Yeah, I like that point. And it makes me think also that contractors, they hate being asked how much a project is going to cost before we've done any design drawings. They're like, don't ask me that question. It's really hard to answer. And I get it because I understand it. But at the same time, I think the phrase temperature check is a good one. Like we need to start somewhere, and everyone should understand that those first numbers we discuss are not the final numbers. No. So we just need some kind of reference of gravity here. Yeah. Otherwise, we're just floating around. No one has any idea of anything, which is not. It's not a good starting point because you end up, as you said, designing something sometimes that's either you underestimated the budget or you're way three times over.
The end goal is to have it built. So we need to make sure that we're tracking that, not just designing something to let it go in the universe. We're going to get it built. So let's make sure we look at the numbers early on and keep looking at it as we're moving on through the design process.
So is your company, do you classify yourself as a design build company or?
So I am a design company. So once we get into the building, I help clients match with a contractor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we would, after the first design phase, when the concept is about 80-90% to where they're happy at, I like to get a preliminary estimate. And this is just a ballpark, but this is now we bring in the contractor and he puts numbers and we look at line items before it's fully detailed.
Repeat, at what point during the design process does that happen?
So this is when the concept is about 90% done and they're happy with it. They at least know that they want pavers or what the ratio of hardscape to softscape is and some of the elements. Gotcha.
Is the contractor's involvement during design, as you're describing it, is it called pre-construction in your industry? Because that's what it's called in architecture. I don't know if it's the same for...
No, so we'll have, maybe I'll walk through it. So we'll have the design phase. We've already looked at 3 designs and we've already revised it 2 more times. And we've preliminary selected materials. Maybe they know that they want bluestone. So that's a placeholder. So what the contractor wants to see is like, okay, square footage for the hardscape, what is it? Square footage for softscape, what are the main elements? Is there an outdoor kitchen? So they'll do a placeholder for the outdoor kitchen or arbor or pergola. So they'll do this Excel sheet with line items, what each item costs. So then we'll sit down as a team and the client will look at each line item and say, hey, that doesn't add, that's a little bit too much for me. What can we do to change it? So maybe from bluestone, we'll go to pavers and that will change the number. Or maybe we'll make the patio a little bit smaller. Maybe the pergola is phase 2. So that's just the preliminary cost estimate.
Is that a common way of working in the landscape architecture industry, or is it more common for all the design and construction documentation and drawings, all that work to take place, and maybe even approvals, and then just to bid it out to different contractors?
So when I started working, the way you explained it, that was the way it would work. Mm-hmm. But it got us in so much trouble because once they saw the final number and they've already gotten permits, they're like, no, that's not what I want to do. But I already did a permit. So then I have to resubmit. So it was going backwards and wasting money. So contractors didn't like giving numbers this early in the phase, but now they realize that it's to their benefit.
Yep. We see the same thing on our side. And I agree.
Well, I was wondering, when you give like the kind of like range at the very beginning, are those ranges based on the price per square foot like we do for, in our field, or is it different?
So usually what I try to do, if it's a project that I've done recently, then I'll compare it to that project and I'll use that number.
Yeah. That's actually a really good way of doing that. And actually, again, we were just on a site visit just yesterday, and I had the same exact thought when we were there, which was the question I kind of posed to myself was how do we, meaning architects and everyone, how do we talk about preliminary numbers in a way that says the numbers or range, but it describes it accurately? And I think specifically, I have to think about it more, but I think specifically saying, I've done a project in the past that was sort of similar to this, and in that case, this is how much it cost. And I think this is diving into the kind of psychology of clients, I think what it does is it allows clients to have a number, but then also to know, okay, that this was a comparable project, but it was also a different project. I'm a different human being from that other client, different site, different timeline, different everything else. But it's something I can compare to, rather than saying this is an estimate for your project. Like, we're not saying that. We're not saying this is a range for your project. This is simply what's happened in the past. It's an example. So it could be the case.
And clients are okay with that. I think sometimes people are like, oh, they need to know exactly. If you don't know exactly, you just say, hey, this is a range. This is about what it's going to be. They are okay with that.
Yeah. I think so. And yeah, if they're good people who have their heads on straight, if they aren't that way, then that tells you something about them too.
Yeah.
Is there an interest to do non-residential work or non-single family residential work?
I think as long as I know who the client is and I'm meeting with the person. I mean, I would love to do a park. I would love to do spaces where people are brought together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you don't want to design for a committee.
So can you work in other locations than like where you are immediately, or how does being a landscape architect work if you have projects in other states, other cities? Do you have to work with local people? Are you talking about like the
plant knowledge?
Yeah, plant, climate. I mean, again, you're exposed to the elements, so I would assume like climate is a big impact, and like what materials you can use, and those types of informations.
I think you can. I haven't. I would assume it would go back to maybe collaborating with an expert of that area, which would, in my opinion, be the smartest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me also think that in those cases, yeah, it's an interesting thing that, like, we often hear from folks for architects that they think that there's a huge difference between hiring an architect who is local to a particular region of the project versus one who is not. But, what you're saying, it would make me realize that, to be honest, if we're talking about a really good professional, like 90% of the value of the architects and what they offer and what they do is the same regardless of the location. I mean, we could even be talking about a different country in a sense. There's some basic, understanding of cultures and things that need to take place as a kind of prerequisite for sure, or as an initial research. But it's kind of like if they're a good landscape architect, then they're a good landscape architect. And there might be specific things that they don't know about that region, but then you just ask the local professionals or whoever else there to fill in those gaps.
I mean, I would love to design a space in Mexico.
I was going to say, yeah. How about Mexico? I come and be your assistant. I can do. You can show me how to shoot grades, and I do that.
I'm building the team already as we speak.
Yeah.
You can pay me with burritos and anything.
Burritos. Is there a type of project for you that is generally a better fit for you, or ones that you would? Is there a project you would like to do that you haven't, or more of a type of project you haven't done that maybe is within the single family space? Is it like what's interesting to you? Is it the size of the project? Is it the location? Is it the topography? If it's on a hillside or not? Is it the client?
It's the client. It's the people. It's because that's who I'm creating for.
Yeah.
Do you have like an ideal client profile? If that exists,
I have just the other day realized I have 6 clients that are CrossFitters.
Oh, here you go.
Are you a CrossFit person?
I started CrossFit in 2011, and I built a really strong community. The hardest thing about leaving San Jose was leaving my CrossFit community. And somehow clients that I've gotten are from that gym, but I never worked out with them. They joined that gym after I left.
And so people in that gym knew you, obviously, and they said, oh, if we need a landscape architect, you should talk to this person.
Yeah. So, and they just have, they like going out there with family. They all have jacuzzis to recover from hard workouts.
cold plunges.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's funny. That's interesting. That's one way to get clients. I mean, it makes sense if you're part of a community that has nothing to do with the profession and it's a tight community. That's probably
It's
Not
just,
that you would join a community for that reason, but I could see how that would be
it's their
beneficial.
value for space is very similar in how they interact. And yeah.
Really? Because of...
I think how people that take care of themselves are generally more happy.
I see.
I see.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you ever get a question from clients who ask about trends in landscape architecture?
No, and I think that's a good thing. That means that I am people that are connecting with me don't speak that language, so that's good.
Did you ever get like a weird request from a client?
Oh, yes. In Palo Alto, this client had a corner house. He wanted a chicken coop on wheels.
On wheels?
Yeah, so he basically wanted to have a chicken coop that he can have it in the front yard for most of the day, but then take the chicken coop to the backyard during nighttime to make sure that they stay protected.
That's cool. Wow. I like that. That's a good one. That's a good request, though. I feel like that's legitimate. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Like, that sounds good.
It's peculiar. He thought about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you put your plants on wheels, to move them around the house if you need to. So it makes sense you do the same with your chickens.
One of the last questions I have is there an ideal time or part in a project for a client to bring on a landscape architect? Because I think to your point earlier, you said that one of the things that happened in the commercial space setting was for all of this design work to happen maybe on the architect side, and then we bring on the landscape architect kind of at the end of the architecture design.
I would say sooner the better, but sometimes I know when they're working inside, they're super stressed. So I can get the ball rolling while they're finishing that. And then once they're ready, have them jump on board. And I just want to make sure that once the inside touches the back, that we've thought about it to make sure that feels seamless.
I agree. And I like that description. I think one of the the challenges with onboarding all the professionals early on, which if we talk to like an architect, a landscape architect, engineer, interior designer, lighting designer, talk to anybody on all these teams, everyone wants to be brought on as early as possible. The challenge with that, of course, is that for most clients who are new to the process, they know they need a contractor. And sometimes they know they need an architect. Sometimes it's not even an architect. They're going to do design build. And so this idea that they're going to enlist and hire like 6-7 people from day zero is overwhelming. They're like, I don't want that.
No.
And I get that. But the thing is also, it doesn't mean all of those half a dozen people are working 8 hours a day on your project from the very beginning. Like in the case of the contractor, they're barely doing anything at the beginning of the project. They're there as a consultant, so to speak, but it's really good to have them. And the same thing applies in some cases, depending on the project, to the landscape architect. I think sometimes the landscape architect is much more of a key player at the beginning. And in some cases, if they're not, it's still good to have them, because if we're doing something with the building, I want to make sure that it's going to work with whatever the landscape architect is thinking.
Yeah.
Or whoever else is on the project, like the lighting designer, for example.
Yeah, and it goes back also to the team. Like, we're all professionals. We all work together, and we, just like the architect, we both want the space to be flawless and work together very well. So,
my last question for you: we usually ask architects what is their favorite building. So in your case, I would ask you, what is your favorite landscape?
Favorite outdoor space?
Or outdoor space. Is there a place that is a little bit special for you that you would select?
So I didn't prepare for this meeting, but I did prepare for this question. And I actually do have a building for you.
Oh, you do?
Yes,
all right,
awesome.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I thought about this, and this was the first building that really touched me. And I was like, whoa. So I went to La Basílica de Guadalupe in Mexico City growing up when I was small.
Okay.
And this basilica is huge. And I went with my sister and my aunts. So to be able to experience this amazing building in Mexico with my family, it was just extra special.
Well, we're going to have to look it up.
Right now.
Yeah, so it is a Catholic church, but it's more than that. People of different religions go there just because of the architecture and just the feeling of meditation and hope.
Interesting.
Is it the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe?
Yes. So, and then
Gotcha.
my name is also Lupe. So
I was going to ask, is that related?
yeah, so my parents said that my mom was struggling when she was giving birth to me. And my dad said, like, if you help her get through this, I will name her after you.
That's great. Oh, it's kind of a circular building. Is that the one?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's an impressive structure.
It's modern. It looks more...
So there were 5 architects that worked on that building. I did my research. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And then going back to landscape, I'm going to flip that question. There are 2 landscape architects, designers in the industry right now that really inspire me. And in the spirit of community, I want to share them with you guys. So there's Nahal and Eric, and they're the founders of Topofila. So I really love what they're doing with landscape architecture and how they're designing and how they're sharing everything that they're creating. I've also connected with them. And then there's also Naomi Goodman. She is the founder of Firecracker Design, and she is an awesome designer as well.
Are those firms located in the States, or where are they?
So Eric and Nahal, they're like in Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Naomi is in this area where we were going to take our cult. What is that city called or town? Forgot where she's at. But yeah, she's not in California, but she's awesome.
Oh, cool.
Oh,
That's
Portland.
great.
Cool.
She's in Portland, I think. Yeah.
Oh, Portland.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel like a lot of cool people are in Portland.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's where we're taking our cult of designers, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We're just starting a cult in Portland. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you were going to start a cult, it would be somewhere like Portland. Awesome. Well, thanks for making the time on, and in this case, it's a weekend.
Yeah,
actually.
extra special.
Dedication.
What are weekends, right?
it's,
When you're a business owner, there's no Saturdays.
No, don't say that.
Sundays.
Don't say that. I don't want to
Weekends,
work on
holidays? What is that?
Yeah. But thanks for making the time to be on here. It was a pleasant conversation. Learned a lot, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for creating this space. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are building an awesome community, and I am thankful to be a part of it as well.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app.
Yeah, and we're also pretty much everywhere where you listen to podcasts. That's where we are.
Spotify.
You can also find us on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram is really the main social media platform we are on.
Give us a follow on Instagram if you want.
We have a pretty good community, and there is some interesting conversations and reactions to the things that we post. So if you're curious, just go check it out. We also have the hotline, 213-222-6950, that you can send a text message to or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction, any questions, anything you want to share with us, that's probably one of the best ways to reach out. And of course, we have the website, secondstudiopod.com, where all of the episodes are on it. There is a little bit more information about the guests that we interview, some of their work photos, bios, and some timestamps and things like that.
Yes, and we also have a store, a merchandise store.
Oh, we do have a store. And the latest things, latest things that came, well, there is some like cool mugs, for your office things.
Mugs.
But we also have stickers that we started making. Because there is so many bad buildings out there, and I think the world needs to know which ones are bad buildings, which ones are good. So we have this is good architecture sticker and this is bad architecture sticker that you can buy and basically put on buildings around where you live.
But we don't condone such what is it? It's not graffiti. What is it?
Vandalism.
Yeah.
We don't support vandalism. So be tasteful as to where you decide to put it.
You could use it in that capacity if you were inclined to, but we're not suggesting that.
Or you could hold it in front of a building and take a photo and post it everywhere on, you're active.
You could do that. You could also stick it on the building. I'm just saying. You
or
could,
the trash can of the building, or the mailbox, or the front door, or the face of the property owner. It really depends. So if you do want your stickers, get on our website and go to the shop tab and And yeah, I mean, have fun. Let us know what you think is good architecture and what is bad architecture. That's
okay, beyond that, more great interviews coming your way, more conversations, more this and that. And let's get 2024 going, even though it's already like the third month by this point. But still, let's get it going. Okay, talk soon, guys. Thanks.
Bye-bye.